Welcome to the Business Blast podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wagner. This episode is brought to you by Authors Unite. Authors Unite provides you with all the resources you need to become a successful author. You can learn more about Authors Unite and join the free community at authorsunite.com. Now, let's jump into the episode. All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Blast podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wagner. Have a special guest, good friend, Christian Chasmer with us. He is the founder and CEO of Elevate Advisors and the best-selling author of Lose Your Limits, Grow Your Business. So welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tyler.
Of course. Grateful to have you here. We'll jump into the first one, Christian. The first question I have for you is, what is the best story from your life that has an underlying valuable message?
Yeah, best story from my life. Oh, man. Probably one of the best, most defining stories of my life came when I was running my real estate development company, CC Solutions, and I was in the mountains in Utah, actually, on a trip with my mom for her birthday, and the business was struggling really hard. We were really a couple weeks away from going under. I had a whole team that was relying on me to move the business forward, and we were struggling, and I was struggling a lot. I was pretty depressed at that time, and I remember looking out into the mountains and realizing that it's all my fault, that it was my fault, which sounds really sad, but at the moment it was very empowering because I realized that if I can change certain things about the business and about myself, then I can get the business going. And from that moment, I really started to dive deep into who I was as a person and become the person capable of running a seven-figure business. And at the same time, I dove deep into how to make the business a seven-figure business, how to build the systems and processes to make it work and not just use hustle to try to bulldoze your way to success. And right from that moment, I started going into both of those sections, and the business really blew up since then. And we got a lot of traction really quickly after that. Really one of the more defining moments of my life.
Dude, that's awesome. And I think that's actually one of the biggest things, I think, for anyone, not just in entrepreneurship, but because it's weird. It's like when you start off, you want to put the blame on others for maybe your failures. So it's like, you're like, it's not me, like it can't be me. But then, because it's hard to accept that. But then once you get through the acceptance period, like you just said, it's actually the most empowering thing, because you're like, no, you know what? Everything in my life is my fault. And when you accept it, then it's actually very, I don't want to say easy, but it's a heck of a lot easier when you accept it to change and grow than it is when you're in denial, in a sense.
100%.
So yeah, it's hard to accept it, but once you do, good things come.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next one I have for you is, what is the most valuable piece of information we should know that's within your expertise or industry?
Most valuable piece of information that we should know. Probably the most valuable piece of information is diving deep into, if you are a business owner, diving deep into what processes and systems can do for your business. You know, Tyler, you and I spoke really briefly right before this podcast about systems and processes and how it helped, one, you scale your businesses, and two, obviously me scale my businesses. Just diving deeper into how systems and processes can work for your business, and every single business can use systems and processes. Doesn't matter how small or large or unique the business is.
Yeah, definitely. And regardless, at some point, if you don't create them at first, which I'd recommend you do, you're going to have to create them at some point if you want to scale. It's impossible without them. I know that.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, Infusionsoft did a survey and researched all of their clients, and they found that most of their clients, the biggest barrier from going from seven figures to from $1 million to $2 million and up, and actually scaling to the point of, the $10 million companies, was systems and people. So right at that $1 million mark, the train started to fall off the tracks because people were going from that solopreneur hustler into a growing business, and they didn't have the systems to do it. So through thousands and thousands of clients, Infusionsoft found that point that at $1 million, you really do need systems to continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. And what's your best piece of overall business advice? So not necessarily industry specific. And I think what you said does apply to all businesses, but maybe you have another piece of advice, like maybe for somebody just starting out in entrepreneurship, or, whatever you'd like to share with us.
Yeah. Biggest piece of business advice, for anybody really, whether you're starting out or been doing it a long time, some piece of advice that I found really helpful at a time in my life was that you can't fail unless you quit. And a mentor of mine, Chris Catino, and Chris Catino, Tyler, actually told me that one day when I was on his boat really depressed because I just lost all of my employees and I had a ton of production and a ton of customers still waiting for me in my when I ran a franchise in college. And he laughed at me because I was telling him the sob story. He's like, you don't even know that you can't fail. And I was like, okay, Chris, I love the positive attitude. That's great. He was like, no, it's not a positive attitude. You can't fail unless you quit, and you're not a quitter. And it kind of one of those moments that just blows your mind. You're like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm seeing this. And I always remember that in really tough times. And I think that's a big piece of advice that I always get to give to starting entrepreneurs is you really can't fail unless you quit. You can pivot, you can learn, you can grow, but unless you quit, you can't fail. And
it goes, completely in line with just accepting that everything's your fault. So yeah, I agree. And if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
If I could give my younger self one piece of advice, that would be to read more, which is funny because you run Authors Unite. But I'm not just plugging that for you. Really, since I started reading 3 books a month and got into a habit of reading voraciously, my growth has been exponential. And I would really, really tell my 15-year-old self to start reading books, start reading consistently, and get in the habit of reading. I actually tell any young entrepreneur the exact same thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When I, as you know, I dropped out of school, and what prompted it was I read the 4-Hour Workweek, and then I kind of went on this binge. I think I read 50 to 100 books over a pretty short period of time, all business and personal development related. And then after that, I almost felt like I was I got it figured out. I was like, I got it. It's game over. And then I actually stopped. I just wasn't reading as much for a while, and I was more just doing, which was also good. But there's a balance, and I think that reading should be a never ending cycle just throughout life. So I audiobook as much as possible. Whenever I have just even 10 minutes free in between a call, I'll just throw on the book that I'm listening to, and yeah, man, because it just never ends. Learning never ends.
100%. It's one of my keystone habits. It's just a non-negotiable for me.
Mm-hmm. So kind of going down a little bit of a different path, but in your opinion, what is the key to happiness?
The key to happiness, for me, the key to happiness is meaning. So creating some sort of meaning in your life, whether that be for a mother, her kids being the meaning of her life, for people that are running their businesses, maybe it's their employees or the people that they're impacting. But for me, happiness comes when you can derive meaning from what you're doing. And the way that I fell into unhappiness for quite a while was doing something and running and building a business that I didn't necessarily see that there was a meaning to. It was a fun business and we were doing really well, but I didn't see the meaning behind it. And when I transitioned out of that business and sold it and started what I'm actually doing now and found meaning in what I was doing, I became a lot happier. So I would say it's finding meaning in what you're doing and then being present, which you can go into mindfulness, meditation, etc. for that. But that's something that I've worked on a lot the past year and a half to cultivate that happiness.
And so going back to books now, what is, and I know this might be really hard if you're doing 3 or maybe even more a month, but what is the best book that you've read, and what was the number one thing you learned from it?
The best book I've ever read, number one thing I learned from it. Great question. I would say the best book, and maybe it's not the best book, but it had probably the most profound impact on my life because it was early on my book reading and personal development journey, was The 4 Agreements and by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I go back to that book every year actually and reread it. It came at a point in my life where I was ready to step into this new person. It was senior year of college. I was now on this train of I need to become a better person so I can become a better leader. And the 4 agreements are just 4 principles for how you can live your life. And they were simple but not easy to follow principles. And once I started implementing them in my life, things changed pretty rapidly. And I really did feel like I became a better person. I became closer with people in my life, and I definitely became a better leader. So I would say the 4 Agreements, and it's a short book. It's like 130 pages.
And what is your favorite quote and why?
Favorite quote and why? My favorite quote is actually a question, and I ask it a lot, and I ask a lot of entrepreneurs it a lot, is what would you do if you know you would fail? So it throws the whole, what would you do if you know you couldn't fail on its head? Because when you ask, what would you do if you know you wouldn't fail? I do everything. I'd get the helicopter. I'd do everything.
Yeah.
But what is so important that you would do it anyway, even though you know you would fail? That question came at a really important time in my life where I was searching for that meaning, like I spoke about earlier, and what to do and what impact do I want to make. And when I started asking myself that question, things got very clear because it put in perspective the important things, the impact that I want to make. So that's something I ask myself pretty frequently. And I think that's a great place to start for people who want to start a business or who are just starting a business or who are maybe stuck in a business that they don't derive meaning from.
Yeah, man. I never heard that. I really like that because it completely takes your focus off of the money, which I think like a lot of people, that's what actually gets them stuck is if you start a business just for the money, then you hit a point of like not being able to work those like 16-hour days because you got to be fulfilled, in my opinion, at least for me, I'm speaking for myself here. You got to like really love what you do to be able, for instance, like this podcast, for me to like do as many as I do, like, I'd have to really like it or it just wouldn't work. So yeah, that's a really interesting question because I think if you ask that question first, then it starts off your map way better than if not asking that. So I like that. That's good.
Totally.
So yeah, man, dude, thank you for coming on. The last question I have for you before we let you go is where's the best place for people to find you online?
Yeah, best place to find me online is at my website, losethelimits.com. You can head over there, check out some free stuff that I always give away on my website, or you can always just email me as well, Christian Chasmer, my first and last name, @gmail.com. I'm always talking to people, answering people. I love just communicating and talking with people. So
perfect, man. Thanks again for hopping on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Tyler. It was a pleasure.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.